Good morning, good afternoon. It's really a pleasure to have all of you here present today to be speaking about what are the priorities for youth at COP27. And it is also such a wonderful honor for us to be co-hosting this event with the Republic of Korea and with Finland. We are very grateful for the continued support that both countries gave to IPI, and also for their leadership in providing a space for youth and also on climate. So thank you very much for that. And we're also joined by some wonderful youth leaders from around the world. We have the special envoy from the UN office, Jay, good morning. We also have Hita Lakani, who was one of the co-founders of Yungo. Now we also have Saad Ukas, who is the regional coordinator for North Africa at the African Youth Initiative for Climate Change. And soon we will be joined by Dr. Omnia El Omrani, who's the COP Youth Envoy for the UN. So welcome and thank you everyone for being here today. Before we start, we will hear some opening remarks by our two ambassadors. First, Ambassador Jong Bae from the Republic of Korea. Welcome, and you have the floor.
Good morning and welcome, everyone. I'd like to begin by thanking the IPI for organizing today's event. My special thanks goes to Ambassador Lundgren and Secretary General's Envoy on Youth, and all the esteemed speakers for joining today. Distinguished colleagues, people say the first step to solve a problem is to recognize that there is one. We have been vocal about the interlinkage between sustaining peace and climate change. In this regard, my delegation is very pleased to co-host today's policy forum with a focus on youth leadership. And as you are all aware, climate change is increasingly disrupting environmental balances. We are seeing how it exacerbates food insecurity, forced migration, and competition over scarce resources, thereby intensifying violence and armed conflicts in already fragile settings. Climate change and the crisis is indeed fueling the root causes of conflict. So we must therefore reinforce our collective efforts and try to incorporate the lens of conflict sensitivity to build a climate resilient system that support peace and stability of those affected. So we must also advocate for more integrated and coherent approaches such as the humanitarian, development, and peace nexus. The UN system is doing a lot of important work in this endeavor, but more can be done. And this is where we are counting on and listening to you, the youth leaders. And the global movement on climate action has been spearheaded by motivated youth leaders like yourselves. So as we are looking ahead to COP27, I look forward to learning from your insight as to what are some of the recommendations you have for governments and for individual citizens, and how we can make the best use of COP27 to make changes. Colleagues, during the general debate in September, my president announced that Korea will scale up its green ODA to help developing countries transition to a low carbon future and share its innovative green technologies with the entire humanity. The Republic of Korea is committed to working closely with global partners and youth leaders to mitigate and address the negative impact of the climate change. Look forward to listening to your views. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for bringing the vision of an integrated approach between peace and climate and how we need to move together. And Korea also plays such an important role by hosting the Green Climate Fund, which is the primary multilateral fund for climate, and finance, as we know, is such a crucial issue to unlock the challenge of climate change and to address the urgency of it. So thank you so much, Ambassador. We look forward to hearing more from you throughout the event. And with that, we shift to the Deputy Director General for Political Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Finland. Ambassador Erik Lundberg, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Jimena, and many thanks to the IPI for the kind invitation for me to participate here in your questions. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Ambassador. Good morning, all colleagues out there. Well, climate change is perhaps the most serious global threat we are facing now as humanity. And as we know already, climate change is a threat multiplier. It affects us all in a variety of ways, from decreasing availability of natural resources to increased climate-related emergencies, from displacement and migration to conditions that spark conflict and fragility. Climate change is very much a security issue, as much as it is an issue of sustainable development. Now, there is an urgent need for robust climate action that includes measures both to stop global warming and to mitigate its effects. And active participation of all sections of the population, including civil society and youth, in the planning, implementation, and monitoring of our climate action will, of course, increase its effectiveness, efficiency, and sustainability. And this policy forum today is a concrete example of an inclusive approach to climate change action that is needed. And at the same time, it's a good example of the implementation of the principles of the 2250 resolution on youth, peace and security. Best practices such as this forum are much needed to ensure continuous, effective and meaningful youth participation and to make the 2250 resolution more widely known. We in Finland believe that youth inclusion should indeed be at the very heart of the work at the UN in all of its three pillars: peace and security, development and human rights. We firmly believe that ensuring a more meaningful, diverse and effective youth engagement both within and outside the UN will bring positive fields and outcomes in all the fields of security as well as sustainable development. Finland is a particularly strong supporter of the youth, peace and security agenda. We published our first national action plan last autumn as the first country in the world. And that action plan sets out a number of commonly agreed concrete goals and outline methods for the implementation of this agenda in our national context. And it was very much drafted in close cooperation with Finnish youth organizations, other authorities, civil society organizations and academia. And at all stages, the Finnish youth were strongly involved, manifesting their commitments and expertise. And it was really vital in getting this program done. And now we are implementing the action plan, and we can benefit from the network that we have created and all the lessons that we learned during the drafting process. Climate change took a central role in our national action plan because young people are those bearing the heaviest burden of climate change and of course also will be so in the future. We recognize, however, that young people also have an important role in generating major popular movements to combat climate change. And our NAP aims at channeling this awareness and active attitude into our national efforts to combat climate change, and also to open a channel for young people to contribute to official decision making in this context. In our work to implement the 2250 agenda nationally, we aim at further developing already good existing practices such as our UN Youth Delegate programs, but we also want to explore new mechanisms for meaningful youth participation and inclusion. At the international level, we have supported the UN Secretary General's Youth Office with human resources, but also in their awareness raising work and in the national implementation of the 2250 agenda and climate change in several countries. Finland strongly supports the UN Secretary General's initiative, Our Common Agenda, including the efforts to establish an upgraded UN Youth Office to strengthen the inclusion of youth in the work across the board in the UN, including in climate change action. We also warmly welcome the new EU External Action Plan on Youth, that takes into account the principles of 2250 and the need to work together on climate change and it aims also for an effective implementation of meaningful youth participation. I'm really, as my colleague, looking forward to this discussion here today, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to address you, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, and congratulations for being the first country in launching the National Action Plan. I think that's a really great accomplishment, and we really hope that many other countries follow your lead in that respect, not only in providing an action plan, but in the process of including youth in drafting it, in hopefully leading it, and as you mentioned as well, providing a channel for youth to be involved not only in social movements, but also in the decision-making process. So one of the big questions that we do have for today that we do want to answer is how can we more systematically include youth in decision-making processes such as COP, but also beyond COP in 2250 implementation as mentioned. So that's both you and Ambassador from Korea provided a really great framing for the discussion today. And for COP27, who can be the best partner than youth? You know, the climate impacts that we're going to be living in 2030 and 2050, it is these next generations that are going to be bearing the brunt. So it's really important that that we co-create the future with them. And hopefully not against them. So before we move to a more formal remarks by our panelists, we want to ask all of you, what are your priorities for COP? And this envision this as a tweet format comment of 2 minutes, and then you'll have another chance to speak with a bit more time. So Jay, over to you. What is your main priority for COP27?
Thank you very much, Jimena. Well, I would say my main priority for COP27 is accountability. Accountability of parties to the Paris Agreement on delivering on the commitments that they have already made. You know, many young people today were not even born when the climate negotiations started. So if somebody was born at the beginning of the COPs, they would be 27 years now. And finally, in 2015, the Paris Agreement was adopted to keep the world on a path to global warming to 1.5 degrees, and while financing affected countries to build resilience and adapt to existing and future climate impacts. However, we all know that these promises have not been delivered. G20 countries, for an example, are still heavily dependent on fossil fuel, which is driving extreme weather events in other parts of the world. Pakistan, we saw recent floods, how it claimed the lives of over 500 children. And 3.4 million girls and boys needed immediate life-saving support. But still, the $100 billion promised to emerging economies to combat the climate impacts have not been delivered. So my vision for COP27 is to see accountability from member states, acknowledging the role of developed countries in driving loss and damage, and in vulnerable countries, and taking the need to act and hold the inaction on climate.
Thank you, Jay. Wonderful. So now we go to Hita, over to you, your priority for COP in 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. First, I think I'd like to echo everything that Jay has just mentioned. She's hit the nail on the head precisely by saying the most important points are accountability. They are transparency and really finance. But in addition to all of that, this year personally is also very special for me. I've co-founded a program where we're working with 27 countries. These countries have nominated youth that are official negotiators as part of their delegations. So they're not just there as youth delegates, but they're there as negotiators, as part of the team trying to bring in change from within. And we have a cohort of close to about 60 young people from these 27 countries that will be negotiating for their countries at COP27. So from a personal point of view as well, this COP is very, very special, but it's also very crucial to see how the program that we've done, the training that we've done with them for the past so many months, how does this really turn out into play in practice when we have an idea, when we have to sort of buy-in from the government? Despite that, how does that look in practice when it's not just the 27 countries, when it's the 197 that come together? Are they being taken seriously? What are the risks that come to play? How much time do they have in terms of really making sure that their inputs are heard? so on and so forth. So really testing and seeing whether youth in delegations is something that is nice to have as a tick box, or is it really nice to, is it really being implemented and really being heard in the process?
Thank you, Hita, and congratulations on founding this youth negotiation program. We would be delighted to collaborate at COP. And I hope this continues, because I remember clearly my first COP, I had no idea. So it is a long-term process, and it's something that needs to be cultivated and supported through a multi-year program. So hopefully this is going to be a program that will grow, and all countries will bring a youth that will be taken seriously at the negotiation. So thank you so much. Sad, over to you.
Sure thing. Priorities for me. Good question. Unity, prioritizing those who need, and thirdly, meaningful engagement. Unity, today we're having for the first time the Children and Youth Pavilion, and for me a vision would be getting young people united through that pavilion, getting countries united, having Africans united, and all the stakeholders and decision makers united and working together to deliver the promises, prioritizing and delivering to those who are in need, those who are vulnerable. We're talking about a COP that's prioritizing finance, adaptation, and loss of damage. So we're talking about vulnerable countries, populations, youth groups that we are trying to also involve. So that's a priority for me as a young actor, and also something I'm hoping to see. And finally, meaningful engagement. As we have the pavilion today, it's a first step to be there in the discussion. So it needs to be followed by other steps to make sure young people are meaningfully engaged. It's an African COP today, so we want Africans and those nations to be meaningfully engaged, and we want to ensure that meaningful engagements for the voices and hearing the voices that we must hear and need to be heard.
That's really great, and congratulations. I hear that this is the first COP that will have a Children and Youth Pavilion. Is that correct?
Indeed, yes, in the Blue Zone.
That's amazing. So we also have to make this pavilion a success, and we look forward to hearing from you more about how can that be a space that can be that can help push ambition forward in COP27. Ambassador Eric or Jongbin, would you like to comment on this?
Sure, I can do that. Hold on, just don't see that I can get my camera on first. Well, a couple of general comments. First of all, we would, of course, like to see that the Paris Agreement and the Glasgow Climate Pact implementation is taken forward in all its elements without any delays. That the urgency of climate action really is acknowledged and recognized by everyone. We also want to make sure that science forms the basis, and in particular the IPCC messages forms the basis for our decision making, and that the commitments made by the parties are ambitious enough so that we can reach the 1.5 level goal that we have set for ourselves. And of course, we want also to make sure that civil society, and in particular youth, are able to participate in the meeting. So those are a few thoughts on my behalf. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Ambassador Jongbin.
Thank you. I have nothing much to add. As Ambassador Lundgren has mentioned, that we really think science-based approach is important. And there is always some diverse views among the governments, but the inputs from the youth will have put more pressure on governments to be get united and producing some concrete results. I will be again in the listening mode. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So now we go to the panelists, and Jay, we would like you to start us off. You're the youth envoy for the Secretary General, and it's the first time that there's an office dedicated to youth within the central system of the United Nations. How is your office supporting the linkages between youth peace and climate action? And how are you seeing this work connecting at COP27? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jimena, for the question. And I want to take a step back and look at, where the youth agenda is at the UN today. And you've spoken about my mandate, my office, and the newly created UN Youth Office by the General Assembly through its resolution 76/306, just last month on the 8th of September. This is not something that happened, organically. This is not a miracle that happened overnight. Young people for decades have been advocating for this type of structural change within the United Nations, this type of political and financial commitment from the side of the United Nations, from member states, to truly recognize youth leadership, to support youth leadership, and to create avenues for meaningful participation on all topics that are under climate, sustainable development, peace and security, and human rights within the intergovernmental multilateral system. So when we look at the Youth Office, I think it should really embody those values, those voices of young people, and that strong advocacy that led us here, that drove that structural and systemic change, that created safe spaces for young people within the UN to participate. So building on that spirit, the Youth Office, I hope, will continue to strengthen synergies on peace and climate action through its work mandated by the General Assembly now to lead on high-level advocacy. So partnering with young people on campaigning, communications, and advocating for change in these two areas and their interlinkages. The role that the office will have in terms of coordinating the entire UN system on youth issues. So how do we mobilize the parts of the UN system that works on climate environmental issues and the parts of the house that works on security, peace and security issues, and how do we bring those together to address through common approaches young people's lives and how they're affected by peace and climate, and through enabling and creating avenues for youth participation, especially in intergovernmental processes on these two topics. I think we don't have to make the case anymore, because it's very clear that the cascading effects of climate change and conflicts are impacting children and young people today more than any other generation, because it's no longer also about their presence, but they're also about their future. And we are now witnessing these effects in the regions like the Sahel, in the Middle East, in South Asia, in Central America, where young people, and I want to also stress young women and girls, are disproportionately affected by these risks, right? We see stories of how young women and girls are the key providers of food and water in their families, but have fewer resources to adapt to changing conditions. How when natural disasters hit educational systems and education is disrupted, women and girls need to stay back at home. When climate change drives poverty, rates of child marriages, teenage pregnancies are going up in more vulnerable parts of the world. So all of this is connected. Climate change is connected to peace, not only in our community, but also peace at home. When we look at increased gender-based violence, for an example, during these conflicts and catastrophes. So the Youth Office will continue to create this holistic approach and call for greater focus on solidarity and building trust in intergenerational collaboration with our leaders in the international community and at the country level. And lastly, with the Government of Finland, earlier this year, we convened the high-level global conference on youth inclusive peace processes, and we launched a guide for public officials to contextualize and localize the resolution 2250 on youth, peace and security. So as Finland mentioned, they were the first country to develop a national action plan, but we are very happy to see that, for an example, the DRC, the Philippines, and Nigeria has joined and launched their own national action plans on youth, peace and security, also taking into consideration the impacts of climate change and sustainable development on peace. So I hope the guide for public officials that we launched will help other countries understand the nuances of these issues and disproportionate impact on young people, and help develop those policies and implement those policies to protect young people, but also to promote their well-being and participation in society as equal partners.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for bringing the history as well into the conversation, and the fact that the resolution just recently passed is not coming out of nowhere, but out of like a very long battle of bringing youth at the center of the United Nations. And also thank you for your points about that climate change is indeed gendered, you know, like that there is a gender lens to climate that sometimes is not discussed enough. And how does this connect also to the other resolutions, 2250, but also the WPS, you know, so there's a lot of connections that are still to be made in this work and in the broader work of the UN system as a whole and its agencies. You also talked about loss and damage at the beginning, and for COP27, loss and damage is going to be central to the discussions. And so how are we going to ensure that a loss and damage package in COP27 has a youth and gender perspective? You know, the finance that will be promised in loss and damage needs to also have this particular lens in order for really to have an impact on the ground. So hopefully with your leadership and your help, we will have a very strong and ambitious package at
And
SHAR.
just to add two quick points to
Yeah.
that, Jimena.
Yeah.
The first one is, as you said, we have so many at the intergovernmental level, international level, agreements, strategies, policies that talk about these issues, but we still, you know, see the gap when it comes to implementation, especially at a regional and a local level. So I think also the communication that we do, the advocacy that we do, and the ownership of local communities is extremely important if we are serious about implementing any of the policies that we were talking about. And on the second point, I think, you know, for an example, like today's question was, okay, what will the youth office do? And similarly, we know how, you know, we always ask, so what are young people doing in the communities to help solve these issues, right? But we ask that question, giving the responsibility back to young people without giving them any resources to do this work, without giving them even the education through national educational curriculums to do this work. So this sort of expectation that, you know, young people will solve this for the rest of the world without having any support, I think that is also a narrative that we need to change, and that's something that I hope that the youth office will also continue to challenge.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Yeah, there's a huge governance gap, right? The people that will be lucky to go to COP, as Hita was mentioning at the beginning, are only the tip of the iceberg. How through those youth, we can really then support the youth back home, right? The people going to COP should just be like the arrows at the end of the, you know, to create that opening space for really youth to become engaging actors. But for that, they need resources, they need education. There's a whole necessary tools that need to come with that. So definitely, and we look forward to seeing how we can help in providing that toolbox at the local and regional levels. And I think that's a perfect segue for Saad, who's the regional coordinator for North Africa at the African Youth Initiative for Climate Change. Saad, with all of that you've heard, please respond to some of that, but we also want to hear from you more about the Children and Youth Pavilion and how can this help advance youth participation at COP27. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jimena. And indeed, you know, from my past experiences at COP, usually you have young people going there for the first time, for first timers, and also for people who are used to it. And then you don't have a specific space for you to kind of have a delegation meeting and have interaction and have presence and have meaningful engagement. There is, of course, the YONGO, which is the youth constituency with the UNFCCC, but then again, the speaking opportunities, the spaces for negotiation and for meaningful engagement are still limited. And then you find yourself trying to interact with other young people to create a safe space for yourself. Also for children, we are talking about children and youth, which is even another challenge there. We're talking about last year, 38,000 person in the COP. So you can imagine so many people and so many things going on. So what's interesting this year is that we have a specific pavilion within the blue zone just for children and youth. And you know how every country has a pavilion where we have sessions and everything. So that pavilion is a space where us as young people, we will be leading the discussion instead of waiting for decision makers to invite us to host sessions or to speak or so on. We are today hosting over 60 sessions during the 2 weeks of the COP, and we are doing sessions where we ourselves, young people and children, are inviting now the high-level speakers, the negotiators, the civil society, the different organizations and stakeholders, and they are coming to us so that they can join our conversation. That space is really unique in the sense of, first, it offers inclusive space for young people and for children. So we have also a specific consideration for children, which is really interesting. Unique in the sense of it's, as I said in the start, unity is what one of the big values that defines us, in the sense of we are working on this together with over 15 youth groups that are working on preparing that pavilion. And also we have the Envoy office with us supporting, and different organizations and UN organizations also trying to offer support in there. So this, the preparation is being showcased. The message that we're showcasing is that we are doing this together as young people from all the regions, from all the world, and preparing this space for us to get in there together, to have a space for us to negotiate, to share our voice, and also to have conversations with different stakeholders. Today we're receiving a lot of, I mean, my email conversation is swamped with invitations, and it's not invitations, it's requests for people wanting to join our pavilion today. So it's really something historic for, you know, the high-level people, the adults more or less, trying or seeking to join the conversation with young people. So that's just, you know, the first step, as I said, is that, okay, now we have the presence there, we have a space for young people, for children to be there at COP. And now our role as a steering committee for that pavilion is to see how we can make it count, how we can, as you said, make those young people who are there as the tip of the iceberg, who are representing the voice of millions of young people in their countries and in their local communities count. So we're trying to also provide podcasts and media room and networking space where people can share their local initiatives there, also where we can engage the millions of young people that are online and capture their voices, the people who are not able to come to COP. How can we as young people who had the chance to make it there, to also capture their voice and share it with different stakeholders? So maybe some plans or some concrete ways in which we are trying as young people to voice and to make our voice count is by having conversations, either within the youth pavilion or either in other spaces, to have conversations with different actors, and meaningful conversations where we voice our concerns, we voice our requests and recommendations. And also the second thing with also Omnia, who will be hopefully speaking soon, is that we are having a direct presence in the presidency program. We're having a youth day where we are leading the discussion there. And we also, with Omnia support, having different young speakers in different conversations where we come as young people and share the reflections and the recommendations. So sharing and conversations is a must. And that's what we talk about: unity, uniting young people with each other and uniting young people with different stakeholders. And then the second thing is also leading by example. So giving the examples, having a sustainable pavilion, having examples where young people unite and respect the values that we want, and we are asking different stakeholders to represent. So that's what we are trying to do by being there in the COP27 Blue Zone and leading by example, and also trying to also show that unity and show that impact. And if you see our corporate identity, I will share, by the way, in the chat, the Twitter account and the official social media account of the pavilion, so that you can follow and also see what are the values and what are the messages that we are basing our conversation and our principles on. So leading by example is the second thing that we as young people can change the narrative and change the world. And finally, the fact of being there is essential, and also following up is what we also trying to think of. So trying to also make a reporting mechanism and also a monitoring and evaluation mechanism. If we are talking about a youth COP, we must make sure that, okay, whatever is being there, it must have a youth component in a way. So we are trying to develop also a reporting mechanism to capture what is this degree of youth involvement and engagement in that COP, and so that we can speak up later on and we see that, okay, this is the concrete impact that the pavilion has been doing, and so that later on we can, improve and optimize and share recommendations for the next COPs to say that, okay, if you want to really make us part of the conversation, those are the way forward. So maybe some final messages to share and calls for action is for everyone to follow the pavilion, because we will have a 100% hybrid program. So every young person, adult person all over the world can follow and be part of the conversation. 2 is for people who will be inside COP to come visit the pavilion and interact with the hundreds of young people who will be there. And if you want to have meaningful conversations with young people, email us also to have conversations and see how we can get young people from different areas, from different specialities, from different regions to have conversations and be there with you. So that's what we are striving for, and hopefully we can do this together.
Thank you so much, and congratulations on the great work. As you mentioned, it's historic to have this pavilion, and it's also great to be balancing a little bit the power asymmetry by you hosting the events and people coming to the youth and children pavilion rather than the other way around. So it is a shift in a really positive way to have this space dedicated for youth and children. And I think one of the main challenges, being kind of a COP veteran and now working closely with the Maldives, is how do you connect what's happening in the zones? Often the pavilions have an upbeat urgency, kind of like rhythm to it. And then when you go to the negotiation rooms, it's a total like slow motion moment. And so how do you inject some of that dynamism, some of that urgency into the negotiation rooms? And I do think that the youth negotiators can provide that bridge between the zones, between the negotiation rooms and the youth pavilion zone. So we will be counting on those youth leaders within the delegations to make that link and make that bridge. And I think this is the perfect segue for Ms. Gita Lakani, who's the founder of the Youth Negotiations Program. And Gita, you've been, aside from you being a youth, also you've been working with youth leaders around the world. What do you think are the priorities for youth at COP27?
Thank you for that question, Jimena. I think there are quite a few different things to be looked at, but I just want to acknowledge everything that also right now Saad has mentioned. It is quite historic to see that young people are now taking charge in their own hands. It's also not just being there as observers, but really carving a space within the COP, whether it is as a pavilion, whether it is a programming, all of that, and the number of people that want to now engage with young people, right? But when we talk about engaging with young people, like Jay already mentioned, there's a lot of sometimes people come to you saying, oh, you're so inspiring, it's really nice to see the work that you're doing, and that's the end of it. Or it comes as a question saying, now, it's on you to take lead and to take charge. It's your generation that's going to make the change, but there really isn't the sort of backing given to help make this change, to help overcome challenges that we're facing, to help sort of bridge the gap that we need to get bridged. So for young people at COP27, I think there are quite a few different kinds of priorities, no matter what you're looking at, whether it is just how youth are included in the process, whether it is their voices, whether they're being really heard, or they're just being said, oh, you're really inspiring, it'd be really, really nice to have you here. And then they continue discussing anyway, which has no sort of connection with what the asks or the demands were just made. But of course, on the more thematic side of things, I think just touching back, right, we are talking about generations of youth that are impacted today and will be continued to be impacted by climate change, by the decisions that are made today. So there's one is, of course, loss and damage and adaptation. We are the ones who are going to be living in a world in the next few years. The generations to come are going to be living in the world. We cannot endlessly adapt to a warming world. It's just not possible. So while adaptation is key, there needs to be that much focus on where the emissions are currently, what are the actions coming to really bring them down, so higher the ambition for mitigation. And then, of course, coming with strategies to help communities adapt, to help countries deal with the impacts, deal with loss and damage that comes with increasing climate change. So the money that is required to help, the finance, the money that needs to go to communities to help deal with the change right from the bottom up. One is really trying to bring policy level change, but two is also really trying to bring communities involved in this policy change, to make them a part of the change, to really listen to what they're saying, because they are the first ones who know firsthand the experiences of such an impact. A coastal community, for example, in the city where I live in Mumbai, knows firsthand what happens when it rains heavy and when there's floods. It's very hard to sit in a room somewhere else and then imagine what it would be like and make policies based on that. So really including local voices when it comes to creating change. So these are quite a few different things. Of course, not all of them are achieved at a COP, because their COP is a whole different ball game altogether. It's very technical and it's very high level when you have 197 countries. But despite that, these are very clear realities that we are facing, very clear challenges that we are facing. And we need to ensure that these are taken into consideration when decisions are being made. I've been to a few COPs now so far, and there's also been times where I've seen that certain negotiators, for example, have just, if this is the last agenda item that they're going to be negotiating on, have stalled progress just because they can come back the next year. So I think what we need to realize is that this is not just a fun tour that you do every year from country to country. It's not a paid holiday. It is people's lives and communities at stake. It is generations to come that we're talking about. So I think we need to reprioritize what we're looking at, whether it's just individuals or whether it is really the larger conversation that we're having here, the legacy that we're leaving behind now. We have a Paris Agreement, we have a rule book on how we're going to make it work, but we're now in the action phase. So this is what is going to matter. How quickly are we doing everything that we know that we're supposed to be doing?
Great, thank you so much, Gita. And as many have called this COP the implementation COP, right? So we are at a different moment. The Paris Agreement has been adopted, and often this is where the rubber hits the road, right? At the moment of action, and we do need action at all levels, including at the most important level, which is the local level. And so it is really wonderful to hear that your work and hear how you're bringing the new generation into play. And we really hope that in both loss and damage, adaptation, and finance, we get resolution, but also, as you mentioned, mitigation has to be taken much more seriously than it is right now. And so with that, we will start to move to the Q&A. For those of you listening outside the Zoom, but in YouTube and in other social media platforms, please use the feature available to you, and our colleagues will collate the questions that you have. Thank you also for the questions that are being posted in the Q&A. Before we go to the Q&A, though, we want to ask one final question to all our speakers today, which is, what is one recommendation that you would like to take forward for COP27? Jahatma, SG's Youth Envoy, please go ahead.
Thank you, Jimena. I mean, a lot of things were said, so it's hard to capture that into one recommendation. But as you said, everyone is calling this an implementation COP. So I would say that the recommendation is really focus on implementation, because we've been talking a lot and action has been missing. So if I could say one thing, that would be really walk the talk, go from words into action.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Gita, over to you.
I think Jayatma stole my thoughts. So this is precisely what I was thinking, is really moving into action, right? We really need to now take charge. So yeah, I'm just going to leave it at that.
Great. And Saad?
Yes, my recommendation would be for young people. We have a responsibility today, and also talking about climate and peace. So my recommendation is be a mastermind in your topic, master your topic, unite with other young people and work with them so that you have a major voice nationally and globally, and then be interactive and support each other, because we are on this together, and we, instead of competing, we need to hold each other hands to move forward.
Great, thank you so much. We have published a paper on loss and damage finance. And so that is an available resource in which we explain one of the key asks that the developing world is asking for COP27, which is a loss and damage finance facility. So in the paper, we've provided a number of options of where should that fund sit and also how to fund it. You know, we're in the middle of a really a recession with a debt crisis looming. And so it is a very delicate geopolitical context that we are living right now. So how are we going to fund loss and damage in a moment of just so many different priorities? So the paper does explore ways to fund loss and damage at scale that include resources within the UNFCCC, but also outside, and for the IMF, the World Bank, and others to really step up their game. But with that, we do have a number of questions. So the first one is on finance. So financing the work of youth on climate has been challenging, even their attendance to COP27. How can governments and other entities help fund young people and youth-led organizations? Who would like to go first?
Yeah, I wrote, maybe I can give it a try. I did write a written reflection there. I guess it's a joint responsibility, right? My first responsibility as a young person is, as I said, work with each other, voice your concern, and then try to reach out as a group, not as an individual, because that's where the power and the legitimacy is. And then if you can't reach out, seek support from other young people who are there, who will be, for example, at COP, and we're doing, you know, like in the African Youth Institute for Climate Change, we're calling Africans, if there is any messages or contacts they need us to support with, we are happy to support. And then there you can also play your role to keep pushing for that finance. And of course, the second thing, or the role of governments, is the ones who are already doing that. There are a lot of governments who are today giving good examples and sharing and endorsing and supporting youth. So we need those people to share what's going on. We need to amplify those voices and those examples so that we can put peer pressure on other stakeholders to follow up and to catch up. And also, yeah, I guess just the presence of young people in those spaces to keep calling for climate finance, for youth engagement, is one of, you know, slow ways to keep, you know, getting more and more stakeholders on board. We are seeing a positive shift in that side. So we need to unite, sharing the positive examples and keep pushing.
Great. And maybe then we go to Hita, and then for Jay, I'm going to pair another question as well. Hita, go ahead.
Yeah, I think finance is definitely very, very problematic when it comes to one, participation, but two, also when it just comes to resources in terms of work that you want to do. And I have faced various challenges across the way. But I think a few things that have probably worked out. One is to really find different means of how it might work. If there is, say, for example, don't put all your eggs in one basket, always try to see if you can get a little bit of support from a few different places. It might be easier than trying to put everything on one person or one individual in that sense, especially if it is travel, for example, to a place like COP, which is a very short but intensive kind of finance which is required, which is just short term. The other challenge sometimes is sort of harder in trying to explain why, for people who don't understand the COP process, who haven't been part of the UN system as such, but who have the finance, don't really understand the need. They don't see why they should be supporting such a kind of participation because they really don't see any value in return. And this is sometimes also a challenge in just trying to explain the reality of the situation, put your point forward in ways which, for them, if they've really not engaged in a process, it's very hard to then imagine what it would look like. So I think just trying to find different avenues, trying to also be innovative on like who you approach, how you talk about it, might also be certain ways to overcome challenges.
Great. Very, very important to explain the value of the work, right? So that it becomes then easier to fund it. But it's a difficult challenge. Jay, aside from the finance question, we would also like to ask you, how can youth peace and security agenda be better integrated with the WPS agenda in approaching climate action? And then there was another question about including the climate language in the next YPS resolution. Omnia, the youth envoy from Egypt, just joined. Welcome, Omnia. So after Jay answers that question, we will give you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jimena. Just to add to what Saad and Hita said, 2 points. I think one of the biggest challenges we are finding is to, even when there is resources available, to channel them directly to youth organizations, right? And I think Saad, Hita, myself, when we started our activism and our journey, I remember applying to so many grants and so many scholarships and being rejected because, you know, my youth organization back home in Sri Lanka was not a registered NGO, but we were a network of youth who came together to create change in our communities, right? So even when funding is available and grants are available, how accessible is that for young people? From a bureaucratic perspective, from an accountability perspective, can we be flexible and trust young people to actually do a good job with the resources that we provide to them? So direct funding to youth organizations and youth movements is something that is missing in the financing conversation, and something I think we need to really highlight. The second area of work that I find it incredibly difficult to finance is on the protection of young climate activists and the protection of young peace builders and human rights defenders, right? Today we are talking about how they're creating this change, how they're mobilizing, and we all know that this comes at a cost, and not in every place activism is seen as something positive. Not in every place advocates and activists are celebrated. We have, on a day-to-day basis, my office gets reports of cases of arbitrary arrest, intimidation, on retaliation against young climate activists, young peace builders around the world. So how do we create protection mechanisms for young activists who are active in their communities? How do we finance those protection mechanisms, extraction mechanisms? How do we deal with reprisals on a human rights perspective on these issues is something that I think also we need to drive the financing conversation into. So for the two other questions, can we get language on climate in YPS resolutions? That would be the dream, but unfortunately, you know, the Security Council is very politicized and very divided on this issue. And in the last 3 resolutions, despite our best efforts and despite the best efforts of some member states, we did not manage to get any reference to climate in the final 3 resolutions, 2250, 2419, and 2535. But I hope that in the future, this will change, and with greater understanding and with greater also visibility of how climate is affecting peace and security and young people's lives in the world, this will change, and more references of this intersection between climate, environment, peace, and young people and children will be made more clear in the stances of the Security Council. On the issue of how does YPS, WPS integrate with each other, also through a lens of climate, when I look at as a young woman from one of the countries in the world that is most affected by climate change, coming from a country that was also affected by a 30-year-long war, for me these issues are not separate. For me, youth peace and security, women peace and security, climate activism, they're all there to respond to a same set of root causes, what has driven us here, right? So majoritarianism, racism, sexism, patriarchy, colonialism, unfair consumption and production, extreme capitalism. These are the root causes that has caused this sort of 3-dimensional issue that the question talks about. So I think if we want to address one, we cannot address it without addressing the other two. So when we see, for an example, young women in Iran on the streets protesting, or young people in Sweden or Norway protesting for climate change, they are blustering a democratic space that also fosters peace and security, that fosters the foundation of human rights, which leads at the end of the day the realization of these very technical agendas that we are talking about, of YPS, WPS, climate, but at the end of the day, addressing the ecosystem of root causes that has led to these issues and that has put young people on the streets to demand for greater action.
Thank you so much for providing such a thoughtful answer in terms of the root causes that prevail and that we need to address in a holistic and comprehensive way. Omnia, welcome. Thank you for joining, and it's perfect timing. You will be providing kind of like closing remarks. So it is wonderful to have a young female from Egypt as the youth envoy for COP27. Thank you for joining us, and over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I hope you can hear me clearly. Yes, and thank you for your patience with me in my previous event, but I'm so happy to be with you today, especially that we are almost 10 days away from COP27. And I think this year I'm so, happy to share many of the initiatives that we are doing for youth, because we in Egypt want to transform the way young people engage at COP to be more meaningful and to be the starting point of many empowering as well as integration and scaling up of the role of youth in the climate negotiations. Today we also just finished the press conference for COI, which is taking place from the 2nd to the 4th, the Conference of Youth, where we received over 5,000 applications for young leaders to come, first of all, to build their capacity around the complexity of the climate processes, and at the same time to develop the Global Youth Statement that will be presented to us as the COP27 presidency. This year, we want to change things up. We don't just want to welcome the Global Youth Statement, which is the youth input to the climate negotiations. We are going to coordinate two roundtable discussions between young representatives and negotiators on the Youth Day, which is November 10th, one on adaptation, one on mitigation and just transition and finance, so that we can take the policy asks in the Global Youth Statement and meaningfully integrate it with the negotiators in the climate processes, and for us to follow up on how our asks as youth is mainstreamed in the negotiation process. We also are going to have a session specifically dedicated for children and adolescents on that day to share their inputs in meaningful dialogues with ministers and UN experts on the role of education and child empowerment around climate change and climate change as a child rights crisis and the legal measures we need to implement that. We also have for the first time the Children and Youth Pavilion, which is a youth-led space for 2 weeks, which I'm sure Saad shared about, and how this is already shaping up. And at the same time, we also, today we're launching a Youth COP platform, which is a space led by the Egyptian Ministry of Youth. And it's made for youth at COP, but also for future COPs to showcase the efforts that young people are doing on the ground. So far, we received over 146 submissions. And I will share with you the link to the website. It has both news and updates around COP that is made for young people to check out, and to, even if they're not there at COP, they learn about what is happening there. But at the same time, there will be a tab with all the youth-led initiatives on the ground, so that we can also see the work that is being done from young advocates. We have one young advocate from Pakistan. She's 11 years old, and she has her own platform selling eco-friendly toys that are made from 100% cotton and wood. We also have another young Egyptian entrepreneur who has started his organization around electric scooters that will also be there at COP in Sharm el-Sheikh, and many others that I would invite you to check out their incredible work. And at COP, I will also be launching a fellowship program that is made for young advocates to build their capacity to help them engage in international meetings, but also be kind of a re-grantor to get funding as well as deliver such funding to the grassroots youth-led groups and initiatives to further support and amplify their work. And if you'd like to read more about all these different youth engagements, we have just published a commentary in the British Medical Journal that really showcases the milestones that young people are doing for climate change, but also for the broader youth engagement agenda, including the UN Youth Office that also Jimena had the incredible leadership of implementing, and also Egypt was one of the countries that tabled that resolution and its establishment. So I'm really looking forward, and I'm one WhatsApp, Twitter message, anything away. And we also have the subsidized accommodation for youth. So for the first time, we're going to have a youth hotel with 400 spaces for youth activists and advocates to be able to go to Sharm with subsidized prices. And so far now, our email is booming with all the confirmations of all these young people coming to Egypt. So I'm really looking forward to seeing you, hopefully, if it's at COP or beyond COP, because it's not about COP, it's also about our youth-led change for climate action. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Omnia, and so exciting, everything that you've mentioned. And we're very grateful for Egypt taking that lead. It's also good to know that November 10th is going to be Youth Day, and that we can all be united together, particularly on that day, in highlighting youth action on climate at COP27 and beyond. Any link that you and everyone provides, we will spread in Twitter and in all other formats. And so please stay connected. We are really grateful for all of your leadership, Jay, Sad, Hita, Omnia, as well as the ambassadors of Finland and the Republic of Korea. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you very soon, hopefully at COP. Bye.